This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Anne Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Anne Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Our thoughtful bold leader today joins us from the capital city of Kampala in Uganda, a landlocked country in East Africa, a country that is home to the renowned mountain gorilla sanctuary. Her journey takes her from a rural Ugandan village all the way to the White House. She is a successful TEDx speaker, an author, and an award-winning change maker who has delivered large-scale social impact projects through educational reform, leadership development, gender equality, and youth empowerment. President Obama recognized her work. In addition, she received the Goldman Sachs and the Fortune Global Women Leaders Award and has impacted more than 168,000 children and women across Africa. She completed 5 successful top leadership fellowships, including the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative and the Aspen Global Leadership Network Fellowship. Stay tuned as she shares more about how she weaponized education, the 5 Ds of large-scale social impact projects, shifting mindset from success to significance, and why it takes a village to exercise leadership. We warmly welcome my dear friend, Rehmah Kasule, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. Welcome, Rehmah. So lovely to see you.
Nice to see you, Anne, and a pleasure speaking to the world about leadership.
You know, I wanted to begin in a place that obviously is a sad time for you, but also a reflective time. You shared with me that you've just recently lost a great mentor and human being in your life. And what struck me about that is the importance of mentorship and having somebody who believes in us. So I wondered if you could begin, firstly, to say a humble condolence to you, to the family, to the community. This truly seems to be a remarkable human being who is a great loss to your country and to Africa. And I wondered if you could share with us what was it about this human being? What did he mean in your life? Why has he made such an impact, not only for you, but for people in Africa today?
It's been a difficult time. So this gentleman, his name is BMK. That was his brand name, like we call it, okay. Bulaimu Muwanga Kibirige, but in short, BMK. And we have BMK House, BMK Industries. So this gentleman, when I was starting out my career at 24 years, I was an entrepreneur. And no one believed in me. I had so many dream takers, I call them now. So I had no dream makers around me. And I reached out to him. He didn't know me, and I reached out to him, but he knew my family. I reached out to him and said, I've started my little business. I call it because it was so small in one-room house. I've started a business, but people don't believe in me. What's your opinion? And he told me, you know what, you're on the right track. Become an entrepreneur like me, and you're going to succeed. And what he gave me was an opportunity. He gave me an opportunity to do work for him. That time he had just opened a new hotel called Hotel Africana, which is one of the largest hotels in Uganda. And he told me, you are going to do all my branding and communication work. And for me, that was the opportunity that really launched me into my career as an entrepreneur. And so about 5 years ago, he's built his business in Lusaka, Uganda, Japan, China, and he's become so big. But one of the things he had as a leader was the humility around him. Actually, when you met him at his hotel, people didn't realize he was the owner because he was moving out tables and doing things. Yes. And so 5 years ago, actually 6 years ago, he got cancer and he was given only 2 years. And every day he prayed and said, if I could have 5 years. And God gave him 6 years. But 2 days ago, we buried him. But at his funeral, people were speaking about him, the way he's been handling workers and everyone around him. And for me, I was reflecting on this question, who is going to cry when I die? Because many times we do things, but we don't realize how many people we touch. And so for me, that's a question I'm going to be reflecting on going forward, to say who is going to be there and cry when I die? What stories will be told about me? And so that has really shifted my purpose and focus to really know that, yes, it's not just about me, it's about other people around you that you touch unknowingly or knowingly.
You know, Rehmah, that's such a powerful reminder. And, you know, it reminds me of Robin Sharma wrote the book, Who Will Cry When I Die? I don't know if you've read it.
Yes.
But in the book, he talks about the first 50 years of our life is about creating legitimacy. So often people think about, you know, what is it that's going to get me ahead? What are the titles? When am I going to get the corner office? You know, the powerful positions, the cars, the houses, the materialistic kind of symbols of success. And I guess a question I've often pondered, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this, is that how do we shift this mindset from success to significance, but how do we embed that in people at a young age? Because I don't think we have to wait until we're 50 years of age to create purpose and impact and significance in our lives. What are your thoughts on that?
I think for me, and it starts from discovering who you are and knowing who you are. So I strongly believe that if you know who you are as a person, that's a beginning to getting what you want in life. But that's number one. But knowing who you are and where you come from, that's also a critical foundation. And so for me in my life, I always begin with who am I as a person and where have I come? So that if I know those two quick answers, then I know where to go. And guess what? I know who has supported me in my journey. If at all we could tell our children as young as 3 years, teach them those values of knowing who you are and knowing a sense of community and knowing that you're not alone, you're part of a collective, I think that would be a good beginning. So that in school, we are taught it's not about you, it's about interdependence and collective action.
Absolutely. And you know, that kind of triggers another thought around, you know, in terms of our educational system. I know you have a great passion for youth and for education. This has been a big part of your life, and we'll talk a little more about that later. But where do you think the gaps are in education? You know, if I think, you know, you're a wonderful Aspen Fellow, we've both done the same, you know, Harvard Advanced Leadership Fellowship. You know, these are fantastic schools that do remarkable work. But in education more broadly, where are the gaps? Where is the educational system falling short in terms of teaching us these basic principles of leadership?
That's another interesting question, Anne. And personally, I strongly believe that the greatest injustice facing Africa, first of all, and other developing countries is not lack of education or corruption or diseases. The most profound challenge is the failure of the education system to empower people as leaders. And why do I say that? Without empowering us leaders, we can't solve the corruption, we can't solve the lack of education, we can't solve the diseases around us. So the education system that we have today is teaching us to learn, pass, get a degree, get a job. We're not taught about critical thinking. We are not taught about compassion. We are not taught about values and leadership. And those are critical fundamental things we need to have at a young age. Communication. I'll tell you one thing, growing up in a Muslim patriarchal society, I saw that communication, we are not taught how to communicate. So you grow up not knowing how to communicate with other people because you don't have a voice, you can't speak up. Like I wasn't very popular growing up because I used to speak a lot, but those little things that I need to be told instead of just looking at subjects and passing and getting grades and going into the world without no fiber in you to think about people around you, to think systematically, to think about systems around you. It's always about you, me, you. It's nothing about us.
And do you think this is unique to Uganda? I mean, you allude to that. Is this not a broader question for not only our schooling systems, but also our higher ed and what we teach people in business schools and top business schools around the world? Isn't this a bigger question?
It's a global question. Definitely, we know people who have had the best degrees in the world but are nowhere to be seen. So for me, one of the things I tell young people is that your background doesn't shape your destiny. You have the power to design the future you want. Because once we show them that your background won't be an impediment to your life, then they think outside the box. They start dreaming. For me, that's how I started dreaming, because I realized, you know what? I won't be born and die in this small community. I proudly say that I was born a village girl, but I refused to become a village woman because I realized, you know what? I'm not going to stay in this village. But where do people get that kind of exposure? It's the people around us who either enable us or who tell you, you know what, you're nothing, you're just a woman, you're too young, you can never do that.
Of course.
And we have a lot of those people around us.
I know. And quietening those voices is an interesting conversation in itself. But just staying with this for a moment, and, if you were given the fantastic opportunity of helping reshape and reimagine a Harvard Business School MBA curriculum, what would you put into it that you think would enable and empower our younger generation?
This is a global conversation, but it's not yet as vibrant in the education system, but it's vibrant in private sector and non-profit organizations. I think this whole question about diversity, inclusion, but also belonging, bringing belonging as part of the conversation. Because if we don't belong, if you feel you don't belong, I'm just there, I'm included, but I don't belong. Like what they say, diversity is being asked to dance. Inclusion is letting you choose the music. But so that is one of the things that needs to shift. That's number one. Number two is the appreciation of local knowledge and local leaders, because that's so critical. And I've seen these very great ideas coming into, for example, Africa. And you're like, did they even consult the people on the ground? Do they know what we know? So really start everything that we teach young people or even older people has to focus on what is the local knowledge? What is the ecosystem around that knowledge, so that we leverage that to say, hey, these are case studies, these are ideas. Personally, for example, at the business school, Harvard Business School, I used to be so mad about, I used to see all these case studies and I'm like, where's Africa? You mean we don't have good business stories to bring to the world? We do. And for me, that's my last point on this. As Africans, we need to document those stories. We need to document the case studies so that we tell our own stories and our own narratives, so that we show the world that, hey, Africa has positive stories to tell the world.
That's a wonderful segue right into it. Can you share with us one of your inspiring stories? A story that is a great example of leadership, bold leadership, that has been a success, either in your community, your country. Can you share one of those stories with us? Yeah.
Let me share with you a story of a young girl who is 25 years to the last month. Sandra Batakana was a girl I met in 2012 when she had just dropped out of school. She was in one of the rural schools in Uganda called Iganga, and I had a program called the Rising Star Mentoring Program, funded originally by the State Department. And so I brought Sandra to my program, and I tell young girls,
And sorry,
when
which
you dream,
program
you
was
achieve.
that? Share with us which program
The
was that?
Rising Stars.
The Rising Stars.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Rising Stars mentoring program. Sandra shares her time between New York and Uganda. But what I helped her do is to form a nonprofit organization that is self-sustaining. So people in her community, she showed them that I'm not doing this for you. For me, I'm doing it for you. And by empowering them, the proximate leaders who are in the proximity of what is going on, they've managed to do the nonprofit without her. So her main role is fundraising, and she sends the money back home, and then they do the work, and she monitors from afar. But yeah, recently she was here and went and saw the kinds of businesses that women have formed. And it's exciting to see those stories. And those stories, I have many from especially young people, youth, really young people below 30 years. They've done incredible work.
Sandra has empowered 85 women in her rural community.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you think, Rehmah? What is it about? We know that mindset matters. And we know that when we meet people, we've all had those people where we think they have perhaps a scarcity mindset, more fixed in their thinking. And then we have people who are able to dream. What do you think is what is the key to unlocking that mindset of no dream is too big?
When I started my business, I was doing a branding and marketing firm. I ran for 10 years. So 2009 started from building brands, shifting mindsets from mindset renewal. So mindset shifts happen at all levels. But what is interesting is it's a combination of the ecosystem where we are born and brought up, but the people around you really contribute a lot to the mindset you have. So the people around us are really, really important. And as you know, they say your networks create your net worth. So if in your networks you have people who are always complaining, you complain. If you have people who are thinking about entrepreneurship and development and big mindset of going to do it, I'm going to win, then you also win. So really to the young people, mostly even to us, it's the people around you. But secondly and lastly on that, it's the attitude. I still tell young people that your attitude will determine your altitude. Because how far you go into the world is determined with your attitude. I talk to young people and tell them about entrepreneurship, and they're like, no, we don't do that kind of work. That's too low for us. Attitude. And then you find another one who's going to say, I'm a lawyer, I'm a professional lawyer, but guess what? I love hairdressing. Let me go and become a hairdresser and make money. It's the attitude. So the mindset shift needs to happen, especially in young people at a young age, for them to realize that, you know what, you're not just leaders of tomorrow, you're leaders of today. So you need to start taking action today, being accountable today, being stewards today, not in the future. So really, mindset is a big issue we really need to work on, especially in Africa.
And if there were three things that you could summarize around mindset, I mean, you've mentioned the fact that it's about the people we surround ourselves with. It reminds me of my late mother, Rehmah, who always used to say, you will become the average of the 5 closest people in your life. So choose your inner circle very carefully. I mean, she would often say that. What for you are the kind of 3 big takeaways around mindset, for people wanting to make this transition? What would you say to people who just feel stuck? What would you say to them?
I think for me, the beginning is what many people still don't do a lot is being reflective, first of all, on who you are and your purpose in life. But you intentionally take that time and say, who am I as a person? What am I meant to do in this life? But taking out the time for yourself instead of just rushing out to go and make the next check and the next check, that reflective mindset, once you reflect on those critical issues about yourself and then your community, the contribution you want to do, you're already shifting things around you. The entire currency starts to move around. It's no longer about you, it's about everything about else going on. And I don't know, and if you've read the book, Design Your Life, I'm sure you've read it. I think for me, that's one of the books really that empowered me to say, you know what, we need, and we don't need to do it in our 40s and 50s. People need to start designing life at a young age.
You know, if we kind of zoom out, go back onto the balcony, so to speak, what are the big issues in the world today that keep you awake at night, Rehmah?
Man, there are several, but I'll just do three. One, of course, the education system in Africa. How can we re-engineer and rewire the education system that we have? That's number one. I think the second one for me is the way we are not, and I'm saying we because I'm a leader, the way we are not empowering enough this generation of leaders, especially the young people. Looking at Africa, most of the African countries, 75% is below 30 years. And so if we are to think about having a forest in 10 years, we need to think about growing the trees today. But we are calling them the generation, next generation, whereas they are this generation. That's number two. Thirdly, I think is the weak government systems that we've seen, and COVID-19 has really brought it to bear to show how rotten the systems are, the inequalities, the corruption. We, especially in Africa, we don't have that blueprint. I don't know who is going to do it. I don't have the answers, but we need to have a blueprint which we follow. For example, if we can follow and say, Nelson Mandela used to do this, what can we do? Robert Mugabe used to do this, what can we do? Documenting those leadership journeys so that young people have a blueprint to say, hey, I want to be like him. I'll definitely be like him because I know what he did and it's the journey I'm going to walk forward.
I'm interested that you contrasted. So when you talk about this blueprint, on the one hand, you know, we talk about Nelson Mandela, what did he do? You know, and obviously his remarkable life, leadership and legacy. And then you spoke about Robert Mugabe, who we started off with a lot of promise in Zimbabwe, you know, when he was elected in 1980. He's a Cambridge graduate. And then he lost his way. I'm curious, why is it important for you to juxtaposition, for example? Is it about, here's one way of doing it, here's another way, or is it about finding, you know, there's good and bad in everyone? I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
So I bring in Mugabe to show, for example, if we are to do case studies and document leadership, we can't only say, hey, everything is perfect. You know, we have to also show our imperfections so that we show, especially young people, those are pitfalls. If you are to do any policies, don't go this way. If you are to deal with international, for example, the World Bank, what do you do? So we really need to study both the positive and the negative of leadership, because for me personally, this is my personal belief, is that leadership is not about a title or even a position. Leadership is about you identifying a need and bringing people together and taking action. So once we have that in mind, we shall shift a lot of things where people don't say, oh, it's the leaders, our leaders. I really don't like that phrase when people say our leaders, and I ask people, and who are you? We have a role to play, each one of us. Doesn't matter whether you're 10 years or 100 years, we all have a role to play in building the world we want.
I know you, like so many multiple millions in the world, have had a Mandela moment. you know, a moment where he struck a chord, lit a fire, or simply inspired you. Can you share with us your Mandela moment? What was that moment when Mandela opened up a whole new way of thinking about you and your world ahead?
That is one other thing I reflect in on a lot. You don't know when someone touches your life. My mother used to say, my mother was denied the right to education. She was pulled out of school to get married at 16 years. And so my mother always told us, go and get the education that I didn't get. And there was no question about it. Go and get the education that I didn't get. Yeah. And she told us that we are poor, but it will be you who are going to break the intergenerational cycles of poverty that we have in our family. And as a young person, you don't realize what it means. My father died when I was 8 years. So it was only my mother who was looking after us. But I didn't realize the essence of her words till when I went to a village school in Goma and joined Nabisunsa Secondary School. That's when I think my Nabisunsa Secondary School, that's where my Mandela moment happened.
Yeah.
So we had a big library because I came from a village school to a city school. And the library had on words which said, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. And so when I saw those words, I was only 12 years. And when I saw those words, I'm like, wow, I actually have a weapon. I'm here because I'm going to fight. It just empowered me. It put me in another zone. I started thinking, I started reading about other leaders. I started reading about Mandela. I didn't know I would ever even see him. I had never seen him on TV because we didn't have TV in my community. We didn't have even electricity. But I started thinking about who is Mandela and what does education mean? And for me, that it didn't stop at that age, but it enabled me even know the purpose I wanted to do in life. So coming from this village, I always said, I'm going to empower other young girls. So today, my purpose and my passion in life is to break the intergenerational cycles of poverty of other girls by taking them to school, by giving them that opportunity to study. Because I can't be the exception to the rule. I need to be the normal. But today, millions of girls in Africa are married off young. They don't have a voice. They don't have the education that Mandela is speaking about. They don't have that weapon to fight the world. They can't have decisions. They can't, education doesn't just take us to get a job. It gives you that tool to get the agents, the voice, the ability to make a difference, to have decisions, to have choices, even on whether you want to have children or not, whether you want to have 10 or 1. Education does that. So for me, that's the basis, education, and that's how I connect to Nelson Mandela.
In that discovery process, I mean, obviously that moment in the library, Mandela's quote, what struck me when you said that, Rehmah, is the fact that education is a weapon, and we tend to think of a weapon as perhaps a dangerous tool. Why you kind of zoom in on the word. Share more about the meaning of that word and why it was so powerful for you. And what was your journey when you said you started reading, etc.? What would be the steps you took that would help other people open up that path of discovery around Mandela, his leadership, his teachings, his wisdom?
I think for me, what was different is the fact that when I knew that education as a weapon, I realized that it's not the negative. I'm not going to fight people, but it's a tool I can use to change my world and my community. That's number one. And so what I did is I started reading a lot. But for me, I realized, I now know, I didn't know then, that readers are leaders. And I wanted to be a leader. I wanted to read about more leaders. And along that time is also when I read A Woman of Substance by Barbara Taylor Bradford. I started thinking about Fifth Avenue. I didn't know where it was and how it looks like until so many years after. But that whole thinking big and dreaming big, I started, I was an introvert. I used to be very quiet. But that's the time I started speaking to other people, like, do you know this? Have you had this? You know, because I built the confidence in me because I was sounding much smarter than other people who only read textbooks, which are meant for class. So really, to the young people, especially, reading boldly and broadly, to say, you know what, I'm going to read everything that comes to me, because information is power, and the way you use it matters a lot.
That's so interesting. I mean, we talk about leading boldly into the future, and you've just spoken about the importance of boldness. What would you say to people out there, and many of us have gone through those tipping points or adversities in life where sometimes it's hard to be bold. It's hard to stand up, to speak out, because it comes with risks and losses. What would you say to those people about how do they navigate through those fears into a space of boldness and courage and fortitude? What have you learned in your life? What would you say to them?
That's $1 million question. Personally, it's humility. That's number one, but also being very authentic to who you are and being comfortable in who you are. So when people judge me by how I dress, how I speak, or how I look, I just don't think about it as, you know, I just know they don't know who I am as a person. So in order for us to lead with bold ideas and really become that person, is knowing who you are, but also being comfortable with it, so that you don't say, hey, they're judging me because of this. That's number one. Secondly, for me, is also understanding other people and also respecting their cultures. And I'll tell you, Anne, I've traveled, whether if I'm to go to South Africa, Dubai, Jordan, Mexico, Brazil, India, we all have the same issues. We all desire the same things, good health, good education, having money. We all need affirmation. We all need respect. But that understanding of other people and embracing them, really, for me, that's so critical, because you can't lead unless you know other people around you. You can't lead unless you know who you are. So it's about compassion, I would say, lastly. It's about compassion and being compassionate about people around you, but also understanding where they come from. So compassion starts with you being compassionate about yourself and knowing your limits, so that otherwise you burn out. You really burn out if you're not compassionate about yourself. I sit on a board of one of the organizations called Strong Minds, and we deal with mental health in Africa. And I've seen how leaders burn out just because they are not compassionate about themselves. They feel they have to prove to others that they are doing great, that they are the best at this. So that's number one. But for me, secondly, is having people around you that you groom. You have a pipeline of leaders so that you know that I'm not the only one. 2009, I started this movement where every year we light a candle at the Global Mentoring Walk. So we say that leadership is like a candle. One can light many without losing its glow. But together, they create more light and better heat.
So coming back to Rehmah, I mean, you have been a candle that has lit many lives. You know, how have you weaponized your education? You have some remarkable achievements of impacting, I think I read 165,000 women around the world. How have you weaponized your education to light these other candles and to scale up? Just share with us a little of what you did, how you did that.
Believe it or not, and all the education I've had, I've been fully at work. Apart from the last 3 years, is when I took off time. But for me, I think it started with this hunger for more knowledge and more information. and for reading and knowing more. But also it started with starting out as a young entrepreneur and also starting out as a young consultant. I remember that time I was working with the International Trade Center in Geneva. And I think I was about 31 or 32. And I realized, you know what, I don't know these things, so I need to be learning and going back to school. So I've done so many learnings and so many, I would say degrees, yes, so many degrees and diplomas and fellowships. I have 5 fellowships. That's crazy, but yes, lifelong learning. But for me, one of the most beautiful learning that I've done is learning from proximate leaders, people who are in the communities, the people who keep us together, the mothers, the women. When we go to, for example, the refugee camps, those people who, some people would miss them and walk past them. For me, I always keep my ear on the ground because I know there's something going on there. So I've learned so much from the people I've worked with. I've learned so much from the communities that we work in. And apart from the leaders, I love this quote which says, by Isaac Newton, if I've seen further, is by standing on shoulders of giants. So I've learned from them, but most of my learnings and my education has been from the people at the grassroots, the people that I deal with, the people that I support. I learn from them. Lastly, and also most importantly, I mentor so many women around the world. I've learned so much from the people I mentor. Sometimes I feel like I'm learning much more than they're learning from me because they tell you something and you're like, wow, she's 22 and she knows that. I didn't know that. And I put that in my toolkit. So learning never stops for me. And I'm glad I'm still learning.
Well, it's, it reminds me, Rehmah, of just the importance of having these different perspectives and bringing all parties to the table, because it really is about a collective wisdom, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm curious to hear about scaling. Can you share with our audience just some of the steps you took to get to that level of scaling?
Yeah. So one, for me, for everything I do, I always begin with the end in mind. I never start anything without knowing what will be the end. And I map out that end. I call it the 5D cycle, starting with discovering who I am, what am I going to do, how am I going to do it. Then I dream and draw things around me, pictures, and visualize it right now, not wait for it to unfold. And then that's discover, then dream. The third D is design, where I go into action plans and goal setting on what am I going to do, how do we do it. And then the fourth D is develop, where we go into what skills do I need, the people around me, what do they need in terms of skills, in terms of ideas, in terms of actual inputs. And lastly is the destiny. But the destiny, we think about the destiny now. We don't do all that investment and realize, oh my God, we were banking on the wrong road. We are supposed to go to Entebbe and we went to Kampala, but we've wasted all the fuel. You don't just come and say, hey, I empowered them. You actually show us results. So that ripple effect goes on and on and on. And before we know it, for example, we've empowered 186,000 directly, but there's so much more than that. Lastly, for me, is I'm an author, because I realized unless someone comes to my website, for example, otherwise they will never have this information. So I've written books on entrepreneurship, my personal story from Goma to the White House. When I met President Obama, I wrote that story, and it's a book that is used in schools. That way I'm scaling my knowledge to other people. I've written a book with Professor Fernando's Rimas at Harvard about private sector engagement in terms of education. How can we build an ecosystem? So that way, with the knowledge going out, that's how people learn. And of course, currently, I'm writing a book on children's voices, so that we amplify young voices So I reached out to different organizations, and MasterCard Foundation decided, yeah, let's collaborate on this. So I'm actually writing a book on children telling their own stories about COVID-19, but we are not looking for negative stories. We are looking for stories of courage, resilience, entrepreneurship, but it's about telling the African narratives for African children by African children. That way we are going to spread the noise and the lessons these young children have learned to the rest of the world. So that's how I scale up, because through text and through writing and through storytelling, especially, people learn so much than when you say, hey, this is a textbook for the sake of it. So storytelling is a great way that I empower people, and also how they learn about the kind of work we do, and also how they put it as part of their lives.
Well, you know, when I think of storytelling and I think of it's such a wonderful African art and tradition. And if I think of just how powerful it is, and I can't wait to hear, maybe we should have some of those young children to come and talk to us on our video podcast, because I think that way we can also amplify their voices. And what struck me about that, Rehmah, you know, when you speak about, and I think this is so valuable about African children telling their stories for Africa, you know, to inspire Africans, but equally, you know, as you said, those stories and those case studies need to reach across the world. It reminds me of the wonderful quotes of a man I had huge, deep respect, love, and admiration for, who was really South Africa's George Floyd, the late Dr. Steve Biko, who once said that the great powers of the world have done much to give the world a military and an industrial look, but the great gift has still to come from Africa to give the world a more human face. And I guess, you know, in our sort of final moments, I would love to hear some of those kids come and talk to us, firstly, but secondly, what is the great gift from Africa around leadership? What do you think? You know, there are a lot of, like anywhere in the world, it's a mixed bag. You know, as humans, we have our failings and our frailties and our imperfections. What, in your mind, do you think is the great gift from Africa for leaders?
I think for me, one is the ability to navigate the unknown. And I say that humbly, because I remember starting out as a young entrepreneur at 24. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have the networks. I didn't have the information. I didn't have the skills. But I navigated through all that. So that being resourcefulness, using very little resources, but doing so much, I think it's a gift which we really need to amplify globally, to say, hey, with all the broken systems, with the lack of funding and all that, we can do this. And I'll give you an example. Before, when COVID happened, I wrote a book before this one. It's called She Heroes of COVID-19. And in that book, we profiled women who are doing wonderful work around the world, including the Prime Minister of New Zealand. But there's this woman in Malawi who is a policewoman, and she was protecting children and women from domestic abuse. You can imagine a police station in Malawi. they don't have the resources. There's a lot of corruption. But this woman was so resourceful enough to know, what do I do? Who are the partners? How can I protect these children? What about in our countries, there are no like homes where you can take children, you know, that have been abused. She was working with her community to ensure that these children are protected. So resourcefulness is one thing we need to be proud of. Secondly, for me, and this is something I haven't seen a lot in America, is and other parts of the world, is this which we call Ubuntu in South Africa. In Uganda, we call it Ubuntu. That togetherness and community and collective action is one thing I admire about leaders in Africa, where you realize, you know what, we have to work together. We have no choice. We have to make this work. So that's another whole aspect which we really need to amplify, to say, hey, we do things collectively. How can we take this to the world so that they have lessons about Africa and especially about leadership?
Those are very powerful takeaways, Rehmah. I'm struck by one more, which I'd love you to share, just about your own personal situation. You weren't feeling particularly well before you came on this conversation today. What is, and I'm not saying this is unique to Africa, but as a general principle, what is it that we can take away and learn about the importance that even when you're not feeling great, balancing the importance for compassion and self-care, but balancing that with your purpose? What is your final thought around the importance of showing up even when the going gets tough, but at the same time having that personal care and compassion?
For me personally, I'll tell you still, going into this work, one is knowing your boundaries. I call them the non-negotiables. There are things I don't negotiate about. For example, my religion, I don't negotiate about it. I don't do things to fit in just because everyone is doing it. I don't. But showing up whenever, you know, even if you are facing hard times. I remember what my Form 2 teacher told us. She said, whatever is going on, keep smiling. And I used to think, oh my God, how do I keep smiling when I'm going through so many hardships? And today, more than ever, each one of us has their own issues, whether in personal life, professional life, your community life. We all have issues. Imagine if we all showed up, you know, gloomy and angry, the world will collapse. So it doesn't matter what you're going through internally. Show up, be straight, have the confidence, speak up without saying, you know what, and then after you do that, you go and clean out your house. But don't show that to the people to say, hey, you know, I've had a tough evening, you know, how come you're disturbing me with this? No, the world doesn't care. It cares about you, but you know what? Everyone has their own baggage, but we can't bring our baggage to the table, especially as leaders. That's one of the things we need to learn. What are those things you need to bring to the forefront? But then remembering that so many people are looking up to you. You're the leader, you're the role model. If you misbehave, they are going to misbehave. And if you're to talk about children, they model character. Whatever you do, they do that. So really knowing that, you know, you're a lighthouse for a number of people. So you need to keep your act together so that other people get inspired, but also they aspire to be like you or even better than you.
Yeah, yeah. You know, that's, I could carry on talking to you forever. I just, because, you know, there are just so many powerful thoughts in that, and the importance of doing that, and, you know, how we physically show up in terms of communicating a message. But, you know, Rehmah, just to say a huge heartfelt thank you, you know, from a rural village of Goma in Uganda, who has weaponized education to impact the lives of youth and women and business. And thank you so much for being with us. Heartfelt condolences and love and support for you and your community with your loss. But thank you for sharing your smile, your light, and your love.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for having me. And for me, one last one, and I always love African proverb. I'll give you two. They say, when the beat of the drum changes, so must the step of your dance. Secondly, for me, is about collaboration, something I talk about more and more. How can we collaborate? How can we be more inclusive of women, of young people? We know gender is a big issue right now. And we also know that women, when women lead, change happens. How can we include more gender? How can we include more young people so that we build with them, not without them? And lastly, for me, it still relates to collaboration, is another African proverb which says that the night sky is never lit by one bright star. The night sky is lit by the billions of stars that come together. And if you walk alone, you go fast. When you take others, you go far. So if we are to shift anything in leadership, we need to work together. We need to do things together so that we go further together, because we are stronger together.
Absolutely. Such wise words, Rehmah Kasule. Thank you so much for joining us from Kampala in Uganda. And take care of yourself and take bold action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My good friend Rehmah Kasule reminds me why we say in Africa, it takes a village. Exercising leadership requires bigger and better thinking. However, exercising leadership is not a solo act. It is a collective team sport that requires us to engage and energize our fellow human beings. So how should we show up? An African philosophy called Ubuntu helps us define the meaning of our humanity and our interconnected destiny. In the South African Zulu vernacular, Ubuntu is expressed as Umuntu, Ingumuntu, Ingabantu, which translated means I am because we all are. Ubuntu first appeared in African written resources and sources in the mid-19th century. In the early 1950s, it became popularized as a philosophy and a worldview. The late and great Archbishop Desmond Tutu helped us explain and understand the meaning of Ubuntu. He defined it as the very essence of our humanity, and that my humanity and your humanity are inextricably interlinked, that I cannot succeed on a sustainable basis at your expense, and nor can you do so at mine. The Ubuntu philosophy sharply contrasts with the French philosopher René Descartes, who once famously said, I think, therefore I am, while Ubuntu is premised on the fact that I am because we are. I think they're both right. In exercising leadership, we need bigger and better thinking. The term Ubuntu appeared in the epilogue of the 1993 Interim Constitution of South Africa, which stated that there is a need for understanding, but not vengeance, reparations, but not retaliation, Ubuntu, but not victimization. Hollywood megastar Tom Cruise recently spent almost a year filming in South Africa and fell in love with the people, the landscape, and the African philosophy of Ubuntu. During a recent award acceptance speech from the Producers Guild of America, he referenced Ubuntu and acknowledged and referenced the fact that he is and had accomplished because of all the people in that room. Ubuntu is the invisible bond that binds the human spirit. We cannot exercise leadership unless we understand that our humanity and our destinies are inextricably interlinked. As the African proverb goes, a night sky is never lit up by one brilliant star. Instead, it is lit up by billions of bright stars. Exercising leadership does require bigger and better thinking, but it also requires that we understand and embrace our global human village, the interconnectedness of our humanity. So remember that leading boldly is about making thoughtful, clear choices, and bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one step at a time. One bold step for you, but together, one giant Ubuntu step for humanity. Take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.